children are extraordinary at reading body language and all the non-verbal cues. And his little friend at school had said, oh, your mummy and daddy are just divorced. You'll see, your dad will come visit very soon, weekend after weekend. He waited and started getting, he started acting out and behaving badly at school until finally it came out he didn't believe his father was dead at all. He hadn't gone to the funeral and he thought he was still alive. And he knew there was some fabrication here, but he didn't know quite what. And this is the, and for my book, Red Chocolate Elephants, and the film that goes with it, if you hear children talking about this and the way they talk about it, I think if it was your child, you would want to be able to join in those conversations with them. You would not want them to be dealing with this on their own in silence. And so this is the alternative. When you close down the conversation, because like, I think, was it who said, someone over here, the boy was a man already and he'd known all along, that all the opportunities for relationship and discussion that could have happened over those years haven't. Talks about, often when the parents come to me, they will say, oh, the child knows, but because they've told them once. But it's not like that. This is a conversation that happens again and again because it's not something they can understand in one conversation.
My two daughters were 8 and 7 years old. Until now, they did not know that her grandmother died by suicide. So I think I will tell her when they are 18 years old. But I don't know when is a good time to tell my daughter also.
I think, and I'm getting a bit scared now that my second comment, there's also an analogy with sex, but it's a bit like
you go for it, Jenny. Funny.
It's a bit like a child asking about sex. Remember that old skit with Bill Cosby? And he gave the whole story to a 5 or 6 year old, and it turned out they just heard sex used in relation what sex is the baby. And this child wanted to know what sex was, and in actual fact, he just wanted to know whether the baby was a boy or a girl. Like, yeah, that was what it meant. So I think, like you said, Jill, that children are resilient, and I agree with you about uncles and aunts and other people. If the child is then honest, like the adult has been with them, that there could be great stigma concerns created from that. But I think for a parent to tell a child is just maybe telling that child what they've asked, or if you said, why do you want to know that? And so that they maybe give a bit more, so that then you're clearer about the information they're needing. And I always thought, like, since my son died, if I had a young child or a grandchild, that it would be quite easy to say something like, Daddy was ill, Daddy was very ill, or Daddy was very sick. And then as they get older, then you can introduce mental illness. And that's it.
Because the problem becomes when there is this lie that the person isn't talked about. It becomes difficult to talk about them without maybe saying something inadvertently that says something that you decided not to say. And this was my grandfather killed himself, and because the family didn't know how to talk about it, he just didn't simply get talked about, and so he was kind of lost to it. All that he had been in his life, all the values and the wonderful qualities became lost because of his death, even though it wasn't talked about as a suicide, you know. So I just think it's so important that we find ways of doing this, and I think each family will find different and unique ways of doing it that work for them. But I think that the wonderful thing is that I hear more and more people are asking the questions about this, and how will I do this, and what would be the way that would be best for my family. And I think that's the important thing, because you're aware of the issues here.
I think it's a question of trust, isn't it? And if children are lied to, then then there's a real problem of trust. Taking it much further, I frequently get calls on our helpline where their father, let's say, or their mother died 30, 40 years ago. and they've only just found out now. And they are very angry. They've been very angry that they've been lied to, and they are very angry with many people who they hold responsible, not least the person who died, because they feel that, in some cases, they feel that that person has taken away support that they should have had from their mother and so on. So because they haven't worked through that grief in a natural way, they are now at the age of goodness knows what, going through a very angry and difficult stage of grief.
There's also the school context, and with a colleague, when I was on the staff of Sydney Teachers College, we began the first death education program for primary and secondary teachers. And it was very interesting because this whole question, what do we tell? What do we ask the teachers to tell? And so, do we talk about suicide? Do we talk about homicide? What we found was actually taking up the notion that Warden actually talked about the 4 modes of death. So you put it in the context of natural death, accidental death, suicidal death, homicidal death. And so you've got those 4 components of modes of death which each bring different grief responses. So you're not putting suicide out over there, you're dealing with it in a global context, and you understand the differences then from a natural death, whatever that might be, as against an accidental death, a suicidal death, or a homicidal death. What was interesting from the teacher's perspective, it was like parents in some ways, how comfortable I am talking about it. And really from the parent's standpoint, when we're talking about what happens with children, it really is, the important issue is how comfortable am I as a parent in actually dealing with grief-related issues.
What services do we provide, lay-led versus professionally facilitated, knowing that the research indicates that there are some benefits to the peer-led efforts? If that is true, how do we manage quality control on peer-led efforts?
Can I make a bit of a criticism of the research that we do have, is that we do have good evidence that peer-led programs are effective in lots and lots of different areas. But in suicide bereavement, almost a lot, I couldn't give you a percentage, but a lot of the research is using sample populations of people that do attend support groups, because it's so difficult to ethically access people bereaved by suicide. So the way in which we access them is through support groups, because they're people who are already know how to seek help and are then given information about the research and participate in the research. So that is leading our knowledge base. So we actually don't know about the people that don't volunteer for research or who don't go to support groups.
Can I challenge you on that?
Sure.
I think we've got 3 types of survivors. Those who want to have support and find support. Those who want to have support and don't find support. And those who don't want support. Now, if you're going to produce material systems for those who have been bereaved by suicide, you are inevitably going to concentrate and focus on those who want support. So I think it is fair enough, to my mind, to use people who come to support groups, because you're evaluating how they have helped the people who have come. You can't help there is no point in saying, did this support help you, if you didn't access that support.
Exactly, but can't we also make the assumption that those people that want support and can't access it are probably the most vulnerable, and we don't know anything about them?
We don't know anything about. But what we have to do is show that there is support and that can be accessed, and then make a separate attempt at widening the way that support is made available. Do we agree now?
Oh yeah, no, I don't think that we're saying anything different. In fact, and I think that
we provide training. We don't know enough about what the impacts, we're learning a lot. We've been doing wellbeing assessments on the impacts of doing this work over time, so that what we do is offer a range of supports. So we have the non-recently bereaved people, maybe in our crisis teams, maybe we use whoever is in appropriate places. They do the front line, immediate intervention, the support. We have peer supporters such as Jenny that can build in. We have some people say, no, I don't want anyone to come and see me, I'm fine. We have some people say, I don't really want to see a crisis team, but I'd love to see a bereaved person, somebody who understands my loss. So we try and do that. I guess my concern, coming from a background of many years working in the trauma industry and the vicarious trauma industry, is we still don't know very much at all about what it means to be continually giving and providing this type of support to people as clinicians, as whoever, and what we need to put in place to do that. Our peer supporters can receive paid supervision as part of trying to sustain. Yeah, it's just too early in the field.
I agree. I think peer support is under-researched, and I'd like to know any research that is available. But I think the other thing, the reality in here is that often peer support grows out of a need, and where there is no funding, there is just gaps. We've worked with a small group down in a rural area of Geelong, who simply saw a need and they've just started to develop programs. They don't have any funds to evaluate, they don't have any funds for supervisors, but they're just doing it. And I agree with your comment, they're a tough bunch. They're doing good work. And I think peer support is a really undervalued resource, and I think it's often devalued by professionals. I'm a professional myself. I fall into that at some times. But I think, for me, that's going to be the next wave, actually, because I think we don't have the resources to do the work we want to do. So I think the more we can develop peer support in a positive, constructive way, the more we're actually going to reach the sort of needs that we know that are out there.
One of the concerns that did come about, and I know the National Support Group program that Susan Beaton headed up, was that I've run groups myself, I'm passionate about them, but there's not always good succession planning, and the difficulty for somebody who starts a group out of a need that is meeting a need of their own as well as the community, and then when they're ready to leave, how do they do that? And how do they do that and not feel they're dishonouring their loved one?
I'd also add that I agree that that's one set of gatekeepers, but I also think that ethical review boards, or IRBs in the US, or ethics committee, human research ethics committees, are also gatekeepers in that they, the assumptions made around asking people about suicide, talking about suicide, immediately gets people concerned, and people sitting on those committees don't necessarily know anything about research with people bereaved by suicide. And I was part of a panel last year, I think, looking at this whole issue and the sorts of responses that people get back from ethical review boards before even really the research might be, very strong methodologically, it might have all of the safety protocols in place, but it gets rejected from the ethics committee based on the fact that it's about suicide. And I think that it's a really difficult area, and there's not currently any sort of guidelines to help researchers be collaborative with survivors from the beginning, like John's suggesting, or to have protocols in place that can help ethics committees understand the research that's being proposed, so that we can move the research field forward.
I feel that ethics boards and so on are treating us as survivors as idiots sometimes.
Because you're survivors.
I've got a little quote here from an article by Michelle Lingost. She says, right at the end of the article, fear continues to guide researchers and IRBs from asking survivors to participate in research studies. This fear is no different than the stigma that surrounds suicide and keeps us from getting the answers we need to help people find hope again in the face of darkness. And I think that sums it really